Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right? You're disciplined, you are consistent, you show up even when you don't feel like it, and somehow your body still feels exhausted. Not just tired, but deeply, almost unexplainably depleted. Like no matter how much you do, it's never enough to actually feel okay. Because that is exactly where I found myself. And what I didn't realize at the time was that what I thought was actually self care was keeping my body stuck in a stress cycle. And if you're living with complex PTSD, this is a lot more common than you think. So I'm so glad that you joined me for today's full length episode. Welcome back to Reclaiming Me. If you are a new listener, I'm so glad that you found me because today we're going to be talking about why self-care can feel so hard, especially if you are high functioning, driven, or you're just used to pushing through. And I want to say clearly at the start that if self-care hasn't worked for you, it is not because you are doing it wrong. Okay. So let's just get that out of the way right out of the gate. It's because your nervous system has different needs than what most self-care advice is built for. And I can think back to when self-care really came on the scene in the mental health field. And I feel like everywhere we looked, it was all about caring for yourself and take a mental health day. And you could walk into any bookstore and all the shelves were lined with self-care tips and magazine articles, looking on the internet, everything was self-care, self-care. So of course, what do we do as rule followers and pleasers? We try to engage in what society is telling us that we should be doing for ourselves, but maybe we feel guilt. Maybe we feel like it's not restorative. And so we come to the conclusion that we're doing it wrong. But I'm here to tell you today that this podcast and this episode specifically is all about making our healing feel more human and not perfect. By the end of this episode today, you will understand, number one, why perfectionism keeps your body in a constant stress state. Secondly, why traditional self-care practices don't help you actually relax. And last, what self-care looks like when it's built around safety as opposed to pressure. So let's dive in. Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally. All right, everybody. So perfectionism equals activation. This is one thing that I did not understand for the longest time, is that perfectionism is not just a mindset alone. Perfectionism lives in our nervous system. It is a nervous system state. So if you're always trying to get it right and stay on track and not fall behind, your body is taking in all of these demands and it's reading all of that as pressure. So what's happening on a nervous system level is that it stays in a stress response. Think of it as like a continuous fight or flight or freeze or fawn state. And that is where you get things like productivity, things like discipline, and pushing. But healing doesn't actually happen there. Healing happens in what we call downshifting. So if you listened to episodes 84 or 86 specifically, when functioning becomes disconnection, you will have learned a lot about the nervous system in high achieving women. So I highly encourage you to go back and listen to episode 84 and 86 when you have a moment, because I think that that will connect some dots when we talk about nervous system downshifting. So when we talk about downshifting, think of it as the parasympathetic state. So we all need that time to rest and digest from the activation that happened that required us to get out of bed, go to our jobs, take care of ourselves, take care of others. But when you have lived with complex PTSD, this feels maybe a little bit more unfamiliar. Because again, think about nervous system downshifting as being in charge of repair, being in charge of your digestion, your ability to relax and actually exhale. For me personally, for the longest time, complex PTSD left me feeling unsafe. So when I tried to slow down or meditate or even just close my eyes and rest, not even necessarily take a nap, my body would not interpret that as safety. What it would do instead is it would bring up all of this uncomfortability and even these beliefs that what I was doing was wrong or silly or pointless or indulgent. And so this is where self-care ends up actually being a source of stress instead of a source of calm. And I want to expand on this with a personal story that I recently encountered. Um, this for me has shown up throughout my life with running. So I've been a runner since high school, and I got into long distance training in college with a lot of structured routines where I would push myself on these vigorous runs. And when I was doing this at the time, I thought, this is self care. And if I'm being totally honest, I even did that up until this past year, where it was like, oh, I'm devoting this time to myself where I can, get out and turn my brain off, and it's good for my body to a degree. Because looking back now, I can see where I was holding tightly to that rigidity and masking it as self care. So if I was tired, I still ran. If I didn't feel good, I just pushed through it anyway and learned some techniques or some stretches or took some medication. And I was just kind of, band-aiding the pain. I mean, all in all, I wasn't listening to my body. I was overriding it. And then in January of 2026, this year, I went to a retreat in Peru. And this was a spiritual retreat where we were also going to be doing some work with plant medicine. So there's this whole strict protocol with your diet and your rest prior to arriving there. Well, in overachiever, recovering perfectionism form, I stuck to the diet as best as I could, but I just kept pushing. I was in the middle of training for a marathon, and I was not about to stop just because it told me to on the sheet of paper. So when I got to the retreat center in Peru, we had to meet with some shamans and also some of the guides working there, and we had to tell them our intention. And I could laugh at myself now because I've had some time to process it. But at the time, there was just such a huge disconnect. And I sat down with the group and they said, what is your intention? What do you want to gain from this experience, being at this retreat center and doing this plant medicine? And I said, well, I want to soften. And I think in my head, I was really being genuine. I wanted to soften the relationship with myself. I wanted to soften my reactions with others. I so desperately wanted to be less rigid and less controlling with myself and my brain and all the things, right? But I just couldn't make the connection with what all that was going to require for me. And so we get to the very end and I'm about to leave and I turn around and I say, and by the way, where are the running trails around here? And they just kind of looked at each other in the group and they kind of snickered a little bit. And then they said, well, you're not going to be running for the next 6 days, 7 days. You're here to focus on your healing and your body. And, if you've ever read anything or participated in plant medicine ceremonies, you will know that it's like a nervous system deep cleansing. And so you just physically are not able to do the things that you are normally able to do. And I said, well, I'm running this marathon in February and I can't get off of my training schedule. I'm going to regress and then I'm going to be, not able to do this thing that I've been training months for. And they just kind of looked at me and like, okay, I don't know what else to tell you, but you're not running. First of all, it's not super safe around the area. There's a lot of rugged back roads. You could get lost. And number two, you're not here to do that. You're here to be kind to your body, to let yourself rest. And I just kept pushing back and pushing back. And finally, one of the guides, she looked at me and she said, Cindy, I believe that you said you were here to soften. And I was just like, damn it. And I kind of laughed and walked back to my room and I was pissed. I was like, oh my gosh. But I think underneath it all, I was scared. I was like, well, I can't stick to the plan. I'm going to get off of the plan. And it sounds so ridiculous now that I'm talking about it here on the podcast. But there was a big fear. It was like I was doing something wrong. The thing in my mind that I told myself was self-care, they're now telling me it's not. And in fact, it's not good for me to do this while I'm also trying to work on my healing and softening. And for the first time, I just couldn't run. They were telling me no, and my body just kind of stopped. And what I came to understand is that I had been running on stress hormones for so long that my system was depleted. And this is often described as adrenal fatigue, where your body has been in override for too long and it finally hits a wall. And adrenal fatigue is very common in people with trauma because the body is often producing energy through stress and not rest. And eventually what happens is it forces a stop. And in that moment in Peru, I couldn't push anymore. So again, that scared me at first because if I'm not pushing, then what am I doing? But over the course of the week, something changed monumentally inside of me. It was like I fought it for the first day or two in my mind, and then I just started resting, not earning it, not structuring it, just resting. And my body began to soften. And for the first time in a really long time, I felt safe. And that was the first time I can say at 47, after all of this work, I experienced real self-care. I came back from Peru feeling like I had just had like a deep brain and body cleanse. I can say right now that I do not have the desire to do that with my body any longer. Yes, I ran the marathon. No, the rest did not set me back. In fact, it helped me. I felt better through that race, but I don't feel like I need to continue to do that. I don't need to run super long distances and put that much stress and strain on my body. I can get the same benefits, if not better benefits, from doing kinder, softer things with myself. And no shade towards people that run. I will probably always continue to run, but I just don't need to like push my body like that anymore. Looking back, there's been many moments in my life where I have suffered from adrenal fatigue. I've talked on here about my infertility struggles in my early 20s, my postpartum struggles, just jumping from one thing to the next without ever stopping and resting. And so I had to really begin to wrap my brain around this concept of non-traditional self-care, because marketing tells me that self-care is getting a facial, taking a long bath after a stressful day, taking a mental health day once every couple of months. And when I would participate in these things, I would leave feeling like it didn't check the box or I didn't do it correctly. But coming back from Peru gave me an opportunity to reframe it and redefine it for myself as a CPTSD survivor. A few weeks ago, I went on another retreat. It's just been my season of retreats. It's my gift to myself this year with all the change that's coming ahead in the next few months. And so I went to Sedona a couple of weeks ago, and what I considered self-care, again, had changed by that point. And the things that actually helped me on this Sedona retreat didn't look all that productive. I mean, yes, we got up in the morning and we took some hikes. How can you not when you're in that gorgeous part of the world? But really, the thing that restored me the most from that experience was play and creativity, moving freely. This was a retreat that was for sober folks, and it was beautiful for me because it reminded me how much I get fed from being in community. I'm coming up on 4 years alcohol free, and the first 2 years, it was like crucial for me to be in community with sober folks. I needed to be surrounded by people who were like-minded, people who were really reevaluating their life and getting really, truly honest with themselves. But I felt like after the first couple of years, I was really strong in that. And I kind of maybe told myself that I didn't need it that much anymore. But this was such a beautiful reminder that when I am with like-minded people, I am more playful. I give myself permission to try things and be creative just for the sake of creating. We had a fantastic workshop where I got to make a talking stick for my therapy practice, and just playing with all of the different materials and not having rigid rules. It was awesome. We had something called a static dance where it was set up and we had a DJ and we were just all vibing and dancing. And I'd never done anything like that before. I was a little self-conscious at first, but then it was just like letting your body just like be in movement. Right. And so again, I came away from that weekend where I used my hands, I used natural materials. There was no goal, there was no right, but it was so freeing because I wasn't performing. My nervous system, again, got to truly relax. I didn't run a single time on this retreat. In fact, I think I've only run like 1 or 2 times since the marathon, and I'm good with that. I stopped forcing these things. I've decided that I enjoy hiking now. I want to hike more. I want to walk more. I want to move in ways that feel good and not just productive. And this is huge for me. I mean, it's taken me almost my whole life to get to this point. Because things like play and creativity, they send your nervous system the signal that it is safe to downshift. So to go back to that concept of downshifting, I think what happens all too often is we try to move from a state of action to rest, but it's like there's this middle component that's missing, which is why it feels like we have to like halt the brakes at the end of the day. And then we're like going, what the hell just happened? So those things like, again, creativity, playfulness, choice sends my nervous system the signal that, hey, we're moving in a different direction now, and it's okay. This is good. This is safe. So I've really shifted self-care into this idea of menu-based self-care. My self-care now is not so much about routines or achievement. I have developed this menu for myself. And what that looks like is instead of saying I have to do everything on this list for today, I've moved it into what feels doable for me right now. And so, an example of a menu that I created after I got back from Sedona was sitting outside for just a, you know, unstructured amount of time, drinking water. I know that sounds really odd, maybe a little basic, but yeah, drinking water, stretching my body, and not necessarily in a structured class. I can go sit outside, drink water, and stretch my body anytime. Taking a short walk. I've started walking a lot in the evenings, like after I see clients all day, or if I was working on a project or doing a lot of podcasting, connecting with other people. I've noticed that the downshift in the evening through walking allows my body to settle so that when it's time for me to sit down and like enjoy a show or have a conversation with my husband or my kids, I'm able to really be more present instead of picking up my phone and scrolling and feeling like, oh, I've got to check my planner again. And what do I have coming up tomorrow? Another thing on my menu is creating with my hands. I go back to that talking stick example. I was giddy. I mean, like, you should have seen me. I connected with this really cool individual. She lives in Southern California. She was the one that led the talking stick workshop, and she's an artist. She makes jewelry. She does workshops. She comes in and helps people design their homes. And I just really loved meeting her and being around her on the retreat because she just had this vibe about her where she was staying true to what mattered to her as an artist. And so by her giving herself the permission, it also gave me the permission to create and not judge it. And I had the most fun. And I think my talking stick is badass. So I'm super happy about that. Um, was proud of myself for that. Another thing on my menu is just rest, and I don't really want to define what rest has to look like. Rest to me could be just sitting here at my desk and closing my eyes. Rest could be watching a show. Rest could be just sitting in my backyard with my dogs. Every single item on this menu counts. And the reason I have shifted it to calling it a menu is because there's no failing the menu, right? When you go to a restaurant, you don't order every single thing on the menu. You just choose. And then if you didn't like it, you choose something different the next time. No big deal. No harm, no foul. So let's bring it back to the takeaways. And number one was that perfectionism keeps your body in a constant stress state. So if I'm trying to perfect self-care and I don't feel like I did self-care correctly, or I didn't engage in it as regularly as I would like to, or it just didn't look how I thought it was going to look, then that tells me that I wasn't really truly practicing self-care. What I was doing was I was perfecting something. Number two, with trauma, and especially complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it is very difficult to downshift into rest. So self-care is really more of a bridge that gives me the opportunity to move from sympathetic to parasympathetic. But it's very important that I give myself that bridge and not just expect myself to just snap my fingers and automatically be in a safe place where I can practice care. And finally, real self-care, it's flexible, it is safe, and it is often non-traditional. So I think what I'm asking, so I invite you to really take a look at your own definition of self-care and maybe even explore some of the self-care practices that you thought were good for you or you thought maybe were the right practices, and give yourself permission to change your mind. Give yourself permission to create a menu of choice and give yourself permission to try out those things on the menu, but maybe not necessarily feel like you have to subscribe to each one of them. So again, if it doesn't work for you, if you're not vibing with it that day, that's okay. You don't have to eat what's on your plate. You can choose something different. I hope that you join me for Wednesday's midweek reframes. I'm going to be focusing on any care being better than no care. So, a CPTSD perfectionism reset. And if this episode today resonated with you, please share it with somebody who needs permission to do less and still be enough. I'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.